give them the respect specifically that they deserve, contrary to the national part of it and the freedom part of it and all the rest of it. Just these guys were some bad asses, and they lived. And many times they didn't live through it. But the things they did at the age they did them, it was just extraordinary. We just passed Veterans Day. And so I want to take a second on Veterans Day in particular. I want to take a second, and I want to talk about two different people that I think are interesting. Two stories I want to tell. One is a man I met personally, and the other one is a story. Really quick, I met a guy. My family and I were eating at a restaurant, and we were with another family. And across from us this is probably 7 or 8 years ago, and across from us was an old man, a really old man, and an old woman. And the old woman, you could tell she's probably late 70s, early 80s. Maybe they were both early 80s, I would guess, at the time. Now that I do the math, they're probably in their late 80s, both of them. But she was made up completely to the nines, and they're out having dinner, and having lunch, and he had a World War II cap on. So as we're walking out, I stop at his table. He's right across from us. I should back up and say that one of the littler kids in our group that was with us eating dinner was kind of looking at him, and he was giving her a bad time. They were kind of playing with each other. She's 2-3 years old. And so he reaches into a coin purse. And this is how old school money was, because he reached into his pocket and pulled out what men used to carry, a coin purse, which is that little coin thing, Bill. You know what it is, where you squeeze it and it's made of rubber.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody used to have them, certainly back in his time. But even when I was a kid, we would have those for holding your coins. Anybody doesn't know what that is, you can look it up. Just look up male coin purse. And it was just this deal. It was like a clamshell, and it was made of rubber. You could fit, I don't know how many coins you could fit in the thing, but it would keep your coins from making noise and moving around. You pull it out of your pocket, and all you did is close your hand around it, and it would open up like a clamshell. You'd grab whatever coins out of there you wanted to, and away you go. So he reaches in, he grabs one out, he squeezes that thing open, he pulls out a 50-cent piece. Not something you see a lot of, 50-cent piece. And he had a whole bunch of them in there, and he had them there for the purposes of handing them out to little kids. And so as he would come across them. So he hands it to her, and everybody says thank you. So I engage him because he's got his World War II hat on. Dude's super old. And I asked him about where he was. Where'd he serve over there, being the World War II buff that I am, and the amount of respect that I have for the people over there. I always try to give them their due, give them a little bit of time, and hear what they have to say. A lot of people, many of them, will just give you the short version and move on. Some of them, particularly as they've gotten older, enjoy talking about it a whole lot more than they did certainly when they were younger. And so this guy told me a fantastic story. And this is literally, I'm at lunch at a Denny's restaurant or wherever I was, and this guy and his wife is sitting across from me. So he is a fighter pilot, and he is, I believe he said, but don't quote me, I wrote it down, I did a post on it, it's been years ago, I'd have to go find it. He wrote down he was a fighter pilot, and he was the only person, I believe, in World War II to shoot down a jet.
Wow.
Now, there were no jets in World War. You're saying a jet in World War II, Jerry. What are you talking about? So he tells me the story, and he and 4 of his total of 5 planes were sent on this mission into Germany, and they were sent to do this bombing run on this plant, this manufacturing plant that was building these what would you call it, Billy? Without the bodies, I suppose, of these airplanes. They believed it was a jet, but they weren't sure. There's 5 planes. The 5 planes come in, and he says the landing area, the storage area for these bodies, he said there was hundreds of the bodies. And the story is that the Germans...
These are like frames of the jet or whatever aircraft they
right. Correct, right. They didn't have any running gear in it, to use a car analogy. So he's telling us this story, and he says, Jerry, I saw hundreds of these jets, but none of them had motors and none of them had jets in them. But we saw all of these bodies. And as we're taking our pictures and we're doing our reconnaissance, out of nowhere comes an airplane. And it wasn't a normal airplane. And he said it took us, and I don't know airplanes that well, so I don't remember what type of plane he said he was flying, but it was somewhere between a bomber and something that could at least fight back a little bit, but, big, heavy, slow, lumbering type of airplane. And he said before we knew it, the airplane had blown, this other plane had blown 4 of the 5 planes out of the sky, and he was the last one, and he was able to shoot it down. And so 4 planes went down to the 1 plane on the other side, and it was a jet. And apparently they had gotten, and don't quote me, and dude was 90 years old, but apparently they had only gotten 2 or 3 jets off the ground, and towards the end of the war, they simply could not afford to produce the jet that they had invented and put it into the planes. They had the bodies ready they to put it in, but they had not been able to make the jets in any kind of mass form. And had they been able to do that, they certainly would have, or could have, changed the course of history, because with that kind of superior air power in those days would have certainly meant something much different than what turned out. So this dude was the only dude sitting across the street, or across the way from me at Denny's, was the only guy to shoot a jet out of the sky during World War II. I was like, no way. We did a story, wrote up thing on him, and he turned out to be even more so. So it goes, that's World War II. World War goes forward to Korea, where, of course, he's a fighter jet. All of this time, they all got shot down 10 times, right? Dude got shot down X number of times, and into Vietnam, where he was shot down. So this guy is a fighter pilot, World War II, World War III, or Korea, and then Vietnam. And his wife, he had met. She was one of the ones that cared for the soldiers as they were being transported on the planes. So she's up there getting shot down the same as everybody else because she's doing transport airplanes. She was a nurse. Again, they met World War II, Korea. She did not go to Vietnam. They'd been married for 60 years, however long it was, and they're sitting there at dinner, at lunch, eating Denny's in the middle of the day on a Saturday. So right before me was this, American hero and a world hero by any stretch of the imagination. Again, a feeble old man at this point. But as soon, the thing that I remember the most, and I wrote it at the time, was when I asked him the question of, where was he, stationed, and what did he do during the war? Because he had this insignia on the cap. I think the insignia on the cap was a specific squadron. I don't remember, but it was one I recognized. And so I said, hey, I know whatever that was. And now all these years later, I can't remember what it was. And I'm standing up and he's sitting down. And when I said that question to him, however I phrased it, his head comes back. And when your eyes are 90 years old, they're cloudy, right? And they're old, and they kind of might even bug out a little bit, old people eyes at that age. And he picked his head back, and he looked at me when I told him I knew a little bit about what his hat referenced, and his eyes, I promise you, his eyes went clear, and you could see in his eyes as he was getting ready to tell me the story, you could see him going back to being a World War II fighter pilot. As he told the story, you could you could see it in his body, and you could see it in his eyes that he wasn't the 90-year-old guy sitting there in front of me telling him the story. No, he had taken himself back. He's the 22-year-old jock that is the fighter pilot that is out there waging war against Hitler and the Third Reich and the Nazis. And it was an experience that there was about 10 of us there. My kids were all there, got to shake his hand and say thank you. And the kids from the other family that were there got to do the same thing. But it was all started because he had a hat on. And I took time, like I often do, to ask them about what they did and where they were. And they love those veterans, particularly from that era, at the age they are now, love to talk about it generally and to let everyone know not only what they did, but also what the people did that they were with, or the people that they lost. That's typically what they'll do, is they really shine the light on everybody else and not themselves. So it was just neat. It was a surreal experience. I walked out of there. I couldn't believe what I had heard. I couldn't believe what he was telling me. I couldn't believe who he was, knowing that there were no fighter jets during World War II, knowing that Hitler was so close to bringing them up in mass and being able to produce them in mass, if not for the lack of funding and supplies. And then here sitting across from me at the Denny's is the one guy to shoot one of them down.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Pretty neat story for Veterans Day. So I love telling that story, and I thought Veterans Day is a good day to say it. A quick note about Veterans Day too, like anything, I don't know, I sound like an old man here, but these Memorial Day and Veterans Day, we have these holidays and we look at them as 3-day weekends and we look at them as days off, and I'm all good with that and I get it, but I would prefer that we figure out a way to take a few extra seconds as much as we can, particularly on these specific days, and understand what we're talking about, right? We Americans, we've become so fat and lazy, right? We just look at it as it's Veterans Day and I don't work and the banks are closed and, I get to stay out late on, I guess it's on a Thursday this year. So I got to stay out late on Wednesday. I get to party it up. I get to do my thing. Not appreciating that, I mean, think about like Normandy. Think about the what they had to do to try to get up into these pillboxes that the Germans are shooting down on them, that the Germans had pre-built, so they didn't build them under distress. These things still sit there exactly like they were. Now we're coming up 80 years ago. The engineering that went into these boxes, these pillboxes, is extraordinary. And the Germans knew or had a good idea that they were going to land on these beaches, and they set up these kill zones. And the only way to get rid of them, if you will, is to get to them. And so there's these stories of these kids. These kids got off these boats coming across the English Channel who had never seen the ocean. You're talking about 17, 18-year-old boys from Iowa who had no idea what the ocean is. They're carrying their 60, 70-pound pack. They're soaking wet. They've just crossed a very brutal English Channel, so they're seasick as all can get out. They're throwing up everywhere. They don't know what's coming. The door pops open, and anybody who has seen Saving Private Ryan understands what I'm talking about when I say that was an experience unlike any other. What I take away from that, and I remember the most, though, is the ladders. And so they would have to climb up and place these ladders. I've never been to Normandy, but my kids have. And they'd have to place these rope ladders. Well, the Germans are just shooting down on them. So they would climb on the bodies of the people who just tried and got shot down. And they would climb over those bodies and try to move that rope ladder another notch up and pound it into the wall there as they continue to try to climb. And of course, then they would get shot. And the buddy behind them then would climb on their body. These are 18-year-old boys that lived through and were, many of them didn't, but lived through and took that next step. And how many of us can take that next step? How many of us can watch the three guys in front of us get killed, drop down onto a pile of bodies, climb up over the top of those bodies, and do our best then, knowing that we're going to get shot, to try and further that rope ladder up the side of a hill? So maybe just as and Veterans Day is past whenever anybody hears this, but I'd really encourage everybody to give it 2 seconds. Just stop and appreciate for 2 seconds. And again, everybody gets lost because it's talked about so much that this is, it's the day off, and those guys were heroes, and we have what we have today because of them, and the freedom that you have today was earned on the backs of all of these guys. It's all true, 100% true, but sometimes you hear those things enough, you see it enough, it's on every football game, and it's, every commercial about the military that's, I don't know, so maybe it can lose its luster a little bit, maybe it can lose its meaning. So this is my attempt to try to use one of our podcasts here to try to bring some meaning to it, and tell a couple of stories about people to reflect the hardship and the hell that these guys went through. And so that we give them the respect specifically that they deserve, contrary to the national part of it and the freedom part of it and all the rest of it. Just these guys were some bad asses, and they lived. And many times they didn't live through it. But the things they did at the age they did them, it was just extraordinary.